Okay, let's dive right in. We're going to talk about a pretty amazing legal revolution. How South Africa's 1996 Constitution, this huge document full of big ideas, actually reached all the way down into the nitty-gritty of personal injury law, what lawyers call delict, and completely turned it on its head.
And that's a great question, isn't it? I mean, you think of a constitution as being for governing a country, not for settling who pays after a car crash. But in South Africa, that line got beautifully and powerfully blurred. So how on earth did that happen? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack.
So here's the absolute game changer, this huge shift in thinking. The old view, on the left, was that a constitution was basically just a shield you held up to protect yourself from the government. But the new reality, on the right, well, that's something else entirely. The Constitution became the actual DNA of the entire legal system. It's a source of values that shapes every single law, including the rules for a private lawsuit.
And that brings us to our first section, a constitution's new job. See, the people who wrote South Africa's 1996 Constitution wanted it to do more than just be a rule book for the state. They designed it to be the blueprint for a whole new society, embedding a completely new set of values into the law of the land. And this is how it works. The Constitution is the supreme law. Period. What that really means is that any other rule, any old-school common law idea about who's to blame for an injury is just plain invalid if it doesn't line up with the Constitution's values. You can imagine this single idea set the stage for a massive legal shakeup. Okay, so this leads to a really interesting legal puzzle. If the Constitution is everywhere, what happens when somebody gets hurt? Is it a constitutional problem, a private legal issue, or maybe both? Let's get into that. First things first, let's make sure we're on the same page. Delict, it's basically the South African legal term for a civil wrong. Think negligence, assault, defamation, anything that causes harm and gives someone the right to sue for money. It's the law that handles private fights over who's responsible for what. And here is the million-dollar question. If someone punches you, that's a delict. But they've also violated your constitutional right to bodily integrity. So, are they the same thing? Can you just sue someone for a constitutional delict? Well, the courts pumped the brakes a bit. They said, not so fast. This quote here shows they were being really careful. They knew that just mashing these two big ideas together would create a total legal mess. They needed a smarter, more elegant solution. And that clever solution is what we're going to talk about right now, the Constitution's indirect influence. Instead of just throwing out the old law, the courts found a way to breathe new life and new values right into it. Now, what's so cool here is the language the courts used, permeate and radiate. It's such a great visual, right? The Constitution isn't some heavy block that gets dropped on top of the law. No, its values seep, kind of like water or light, into every nook and cranny of the old common law, guiding it and forcing it to change from the inside out. So how do they actually do this in a courtroom? They use this two-step test, which became famous from the Carmichael case. A judge first asks, Step 1, does our current law live up to the Constitution's standards? Is it fair? Does it protect vulnerable people? If the answer is no, they go to Step 2. Okay, so how can we tweak the law? How can we develop it to make it right? And what are they measuring the old law against? Well, it's these values. This list basically became a new checklist for justice. When a court looks at a case now, it's asking, does this decision promote dignity? Does it advance equality? Does it hold people in power accountable? These aren't just fluffy ideas anymore. They're real, practical legal tools. All right, now for the really exciting part. Let's see how this powerful theory actually played out in the real world, how it changed lives, and totally redefined what the government is responsible for. Our first case study starts with some really simple, chilling facts. The police knew that a specific guy had guns, was unstable, and was a threat to the people around him. And they did nothing. They failed to use their power to get those guns away from him. And of course, the worst happened. He shot his neighbor, Mr. Vendwivimbo. Now, under the old law, the police probably wouldn't have been held liable. They didn't have a clear legal duty to prevent harm like that. But now, with a constitution that screams about accountability and the right to life, was that old rule still good enough? And here is the groundbreaking answer from the court: the constitutional value of accountability. That was the magic word. It was the thing that tipped the scales. The court said that value created a new legal duty for the police to actually protect citizens from a danger they knew about. For the first time, the state was liable for not acting. Now for the case that started it all, Carr Mitchell. The facts here are even more harrowing. A man with a known violent history was up for bail, but incredibly, the police and prosecutors didn't give the court the full story about his past.
So he was released, and a short time later, he savagely attacked Alex Carmichael. When she sued the state, the first courts to hear the case relied on the old law and came to a really shocking conclusion. The state had no legal duty to protect her. It wasn't their problem. But then it got to the Constitutional Court, and they basically said, absolutely not. They declared that the old rule just didn't cut it anymore. The state's constitutional duty to protect its citizens wasn't just some vague political promise. It was a real, legal obligation. The law had to be changed. The state could no longer just stand on the sidelines and watch. This was a revolution.
So let's pull the camera back for our final section. These cases weren't just one-off decisions. They were the tremors that signaled a fundamental reshaping of the entire legal landscape.
And we can see the Constitution's impact in three main ways. Sometimes it just adjusts how an old rule gets used, like in Carmichael. Other times it completely changes a rule, like recognizing that same-sex partners could sue for loss of support. And sometimes it can even introduce brand new legal ideas, like the very controversial wrongful life claim. And this is the ultimate takeaway, the big idea. The South African Constitution transformed the law of delict from just a tool for settling private arguments into a powerful instrument for promoting social justice, for protecting the vulnerable, and for holding the state's feet to the fire.
But you know, this story is far from over, and it leaves us with a huge question for the future. This new approach gives courts incredible flexibility to do the right thing in each case. But does that flexibility come at a cost to legal certainty? Finding that perfect balance, well, that's the next great challenge in this ongoing legal story.